National Infrastructure Agency, working with Waka Kotahi to develop a 30-year plan for transport and infrastructure. There's a link to the proposed fast-track approvals regime. And as I said, a reform signalled for the National Land Transport Fund revenue streams. We've already seen that the electric vehicles will be required to pay road user charges from April as part of the 100-day plan. Move all vehicles from fuel. They're going to move all vehicles from fuel excise to road user charges based on weight and distance. Timing around that hasn't been confirmed yet. And there's also some stuff in there around reforming tolling and congestion charging legislation. Members will be aware that right now you can only toll on new roads. So they may be adding more flexibility into that legislation to toll on existing roads, for example. One of the things that's interesting to us in here too, as a council, is the proposal to amend the legislation to align the GPS with the LTP 10-year investment horizon. This is potentially a good thing, but there's devil in the detail in terms of what that means for election cycles that we'll need to understand as well. And there's some work happening looking at the emissions trading scheme and the development of a new emissions reduction plan, and the approach to emissions reductions for land transport is quite different in this plan. So in terms of strategic priorities, they're different from the last one. So just as a source of comparison, 2021, the focus was on safety, better travel options, so that focus on mode shift. Climate change called out as a headline target. The focus on the decarbonising transport plan that came through with the previous government, and improving freight connections. This GPS, the focus is economic growth and productivity. A new one here around increased maintenance and resilience. Safety, but with a narrower lens, and I'll talk to that as we get into the detail. And value for money has been lifted up to a strategic priority rather than an underlying priority in the document. Good. So what's changed? If you look into the economic growth and productivity strategic area, this is new, but it amalgamates freight and better travel options from the previous GPS, with much more of a focus on congestion management. So this is a top priority. It integrates quite a big part of it is the roads of national significance coming back in. There's a much clearer directive to Waka Kotahi to focus on maintaining the state highway network. Public transport, but only a called out focus on Auckland and Wellington in the document. Walking and cycling, the lens has been narrowed to investment linked to economic growth, safety, or demonstrated volume of use. And we'll talk a bit more about some of the practical implications that come through on the activity classes there as well. Land use integration is focused on unlocking access to greenfield land and compact economic form, but there may be some, I don't know, competing demands there. And there's a narrower interpretation of economic growth. It's very heavily focused on movement, so movement of freight, movement on the network, and that sense of local roads and placemaking doesn't come through quite so strongly, and that's something that I think will be worth reflecting on. As I said, the increased maintenance and resilience priority is new. There is a new dedicated pothole prevention activity class for local roads and state highways, and we'll talk a bit more about how that's all lining up when we get further into this. Some of the things in here that are really good for our maintenance teams are a focus on proactive, not reactive maintenance. This is entirely on renewal and resurfacing of the roadway only in here. Tolling can be considered for new roads as part of the reforms. Restart for the road efficiency group. So this is an idea, and there's an idea in here of actually getting better kind of best practice happening across road controlling authorities, and that's something that we would support as well. So safety, much narrower focus on safety. There is a significantly reduced focus on safe system infrastructure. There is greater focus on compliance and enforcement. There's an infringement fee review signalled to align with similar overseas jurisdictions and on the revenue gathering side, and councillors will be aware of the changes to the settings for speed limit legislations, and that comes through in here as well. Value for money. So improving efficiency and effectiveness, that's good stuff. If you look into the detail here in terms of the implications for local government, there is a signal here to increase fare box recovery and third-party revenue from public transport. Reduce the spend on temporary traffic management, which is a good thing. Review road safety investment, so that focus on efficiency and lower cost improvements will come through. And the whole of life costs, so maximising the long run value from investments is a very strong signal in here as well. So the money, there is $5.2 billion more in this GPS than the previous GPS. That's a 36.4% increase. Lynette, you may have a comment here, but I'm imagining that a lot of that may be sucked up into inflationary costs.
Some definitely,
some
but
would.
Also sucked up into some of the big projects.
The big projects, so the roads of national significance and the like. Looking at the activity class details, so in the document, it's all broken down into activity classes, so you can see which money's going where. State highway improvements and state highway and local road maintenance, where we get some of the big jumps. We'll talk later about some of the deck chair movement that's happening in the local road improvement activity class, and where we're seeing reductions, public transport infrastructure, walking and cycling, safety, and that again, there's a bit of deck chair shuffling in there as well, which I'll talk to in a minute. Finally, I think it's all fine to see the averages, which I showed you on that last slide, but if you're looking at the upper and lower thresholds, which the GPS also publishes, some asset classes could potentially drop significantly after 1 to 2 years. For example, there's potentially a big drop in the national availability of funding in the walking and cycling improvement space. And I haven't talked about rail, but the rail network, there's some stuff in there as well that we're checking in with the port in particular to see what their views are in this space as well. And then activity class descriptions. So if you look into these activity classes, there's quite a high degree of prescription in some of the descriptions. So for local road improvements, it's the same as it was previously with new roads and improving capacity of existing roads in there, but it also brings in end-of-life bridge and structures renewals and safe system infrastructure, and it didn't previously. There's also, as I said, a higher degree of prescription, so there's no multimodal improvements through this activity class, reduced funding for traffic calming. We've got the local road pothole prevention, so that's resealing, rehab and drainage for the local road network, local road operations, public transport infrastructure, as noted, only refers to Auckland and Wellington. Safety, so road policing and enforcement and road safety education focus. There is also an expectation in here that road safety will be achieved across other activity classes, such as pothole prevention. And no investment is to be made through this activity class in safe system infrastructure and traffic calming measures. So that's different than last time round. Walking and cycling is entirely ring-fenced. So there is that reduction, but within that reduction, this has to include footpaths, shared paths, cycle network maintenance and improvements. It was previously improvements in the most recent GPS.
So maintenance and renewals of all footpaths have gone into the walking and cycling category as opposed to into the maintenance work categories. Yeah.
So any activities funded must undergo consultation as a direction in here as well, which I think is something that we would require clarification on with regard to maintenance activities. one final point here, the maintenance and renewals funding is now split up and ring-fenced across activity classes, where it previously was in one bucket, and that may have some flexibility challenges in practical terms, which staff have talked about. So we're getting through them. The investment program, so it also calls out an investment program for different regions. There are some implications for Christchurch here. We would suggest that the scale of investment doesn't necessarily reflect the city and region's economic contribution. There's no mention of PT Futures or MRT, big focus on state highways. The Canterbury package referred to in here, we had a chat with Waka Kotahi about that. It refers to the NZ Up funding program. So from our perspective, that's Horswell Road and Bram Street state highway projects. Potentially sit in here. They'll still need to go through the NZTA board processes. So very, very weighted to North Island projects. So last couple of slides, potential submission points for discussion with you today. It's always good to start with the positive and what we support when we're doing our submissions. So in discussion with staff, some of the things that are positive is the increased funding for maintenance and resilience. That aligns really nicely with the looking after what we've got discussions that we've been having through our LTP process. Transport system does play an important role in economic growth and productivity. So focusing on that will potentially have some benefits. Increased focus on road safety, compliance and enforcement, again, is positive. It's an important part of the toolkit. The focus on value for money and exploration of a broader set of transport funding and financing tools is a positive thing, because the land transport funding system is under significant pressure and we need to do things differently. The consolidation of funding back into the land transport fund, Lynette, I think you refer to it as the lolly scramble
that we have had.
Yeah. This kind of refocuses back on the core fund, which provides greater certainty for council, and link to that direction to align it up with the 10-year planning horizon through the long-term planning process. One thing that I haven't mentioned, but was very, very happily received by transport staff, was a proposed review of the NZTA business case processes to reduce costs and streamline. These have become onerous and counterproductive.
I think, can I add to that as well from to what Jane said, is that increased focus on trying to strip some of the cost out of the work that we do, and particularly focus on the temporary traffic management and the costs that that's incurring, and how can we find better ways to still keep our workers safe, but do it in a better way. That's a really positive focus.
Yeah. And final slide. There is an opportunity here, as there always is, to showcase the great work that we have done or have planned to meet the draft GPS objectives. The planning work that we've done at a greater Christchurch level on the MRT and PT Futures, there's a great story to tell there in terms of getting ahead of the curve with population growth and not ending up in a congested mess as a city. There's a good story to tell around the cycle network and the increase in participation that and also the congestion busting impact of multimodal travel in the city context. So there's some good stuff there that we can talk about. But there are elements that we may wish to raise as issues or requests to government. I think the first one is the lack of representation of Christchurch and the priorities. There's a story we can tell around current and future economic contribution. Staff is suggesting that we request that PT Futures and MRT and the Pages Road Bridge projects are included in the Canterbury package. And there is something to explore here in terms of the implications of a narrower strategic focus on transport outcomes. And what I'm doing, I think, from a city perspective, if we look at the council's strategic priorities, there is a broader range of outcomes that we're seeking as a city from transport, whether that be emissions reduction, inclusive access. Some of those things aren't called out in the document, and I think it might be useful to reflect on those. Better recognition of the distinct role that local roads play to support urban growth. It's very state highway focused, and local roads have a particular contribution to make. And then there's some stuff in here around activity classes, that sort of balance, scope, flexibility that we've touched on. And also I think that balance of investment to achieve urban outcomes. And then we can invite further discussion. So that is our starter. And so questions and comments through the chair.
Through the chair, can I just say we are working to a really tight deadline. I think we're aiming to get this submission to, a draft of this submission to the Finance and Performance Committee. So it will be coming to Finance and Performance Committee next week. Yeah, which means we need to have it written and out on the agenda by the end of play Thursday to go out with the agenda. So it's a tight turnaround. That said, that is getting it to that meeting. So we've got to try and turn this around. So the more you can give us today, the more helpful that'll be. There are also some parts of this where staff will, in that draft submission, add some comment, which will be around the logistics of those things, working between different activity classes, and where actually it could hinder us from getting the best value outcome for the government's dollar.
Yeah, thank you. Tim, please.
Thank you. I think slide 3, which is, I really like the move all vehicles from fuel excess to RUC based on the weight and distance, because that could actually play really well into our public transport and getting people on bikes, because you would be penalised for using a vehicle irrelevant of the vehicle more than less. So it would encourage people perhaps to get onto public transport and bicycles. If it's going to happen, I think that's a really good argument, because that fits in with everything we're doing. Slide 10, where is it? Slide 10. The two things that I've been hearing a lot about are potholes and also enforcement, speed cameras, etc. So that I think that we can support that. That's a really important thing, because people are wanting more of both. The one thing that I'm confused about is when you look at an area, and we've, through Wakatahi, has said you design a cycle lane and you've got so much time to do it, and it's almost forced through because we need the money, the 90% funded, etc. I think that attitude needs to change if we're going to do that, because our staff, you guys, we have lost mana with the public, because those that don't want them, there's always two sides to everything, are feeling it's being railroaded through. And irrelevant whether you're a bike user or a car user, you must have respect going through someone else's community. And I think we've lost mana there. So to somehow look at that, irrelevant of how this goes forward, we need to change that, forcing a timeline by Wakatahi, because it's our staff and us that are working with our communities, but they're forcing it through. They don't have to face it. That's relevant to them. And I think that's wrong.
I think that, through the chair, I think that that is a big part of this, and there's a really clear message in this GPS that they want to consolidate back to the National Land Transport Fund and the National Land Transport Program, and be really set. And they're showing a really clear message. The government is showing a really clear message through this, that they want a 10-year vision of what they want to see for transport through that fund. So they want that planning done as well, and not have a lot of different schemes and systems that come into play with very tight deadlines, so that we can then build that consistency and build a really solid program. I think that's a really positive thing. I agree with you.
Because we put in a budget, then we start digging in the ground. It's not that 90% doesn't actually equate to 90% because we've gone over budget, but it's been forced by a timeline. And I think that is really bad 21st century planning. Cool.
Samuel?
Hey, thank you. This is good. I am largely in agreement with it, so I don't have much to change or suggest. It's good. Only a couple of things. We'll reference the resident survey in it, won't we? I guess.
Yes.
Just thinking of
Yes.
in terms
Yes.
of what people are telling us.
Yeah.
The only other two was around congestion charging. Have we been sort of explicit? I mean, and maybe it's one of those things we'll discuss on the day. You know, Christchurch doesn't need congestion charging at this point in time.
Yeah.
So how are we going to kind of articulate that to them?
I don't think the government is intending to put it in place. What they're intending is to open up the tools for us to be able to consider it in the future,
Right.
not to put it in place. They're looking to open up the legislative tools for us to be able to look at it, or particularly for Waka Kotahi to be able to look at it for their big roads and national significance.
Okay, so it's more on the
as Lynette said, it's more about the legislative settings to create a bit more flex in those. That's my sense of it anyway.
Okay. No, that's cool. And this one probably leads on to it. It's just around the tolling of roads. And I think you might have made a comment around the existing roads. So in my mind, if you're going to toll a road, you toll it on new infrastructure. You don't toll it on existing infrastructure.
Again, that's what the current legislation states, and it has very specific rules around how you can and when you can and can't put tolls in place.
Yeah.
And that's what they're looking to open up and open the opportunity for, focus more on the state highway network.
Okay, but do we need to sort of put a position forward that we wouldn't be, because I don't think it would be right for people of Christchurch to pay a toll on a road they've already paid for.
Yeah, look, I think another part of it is opening up the toolkit beyond tolls. You'll see, I mean, in the document and some of the discussion that's happening around point of use charging to manage congestion that Auckland are currently opening up the discussion around. So I think it's getting, where there is a problem, getting a more flexible set of tools that local authorities can use to manage congestion that may or may not be on new roads. That might be tolls, that might be some other mechanism.
I guess just
acknowledging, I was just going to say, acknowledging that it's ultimately the local authority's decision whether they use it or not.
And we would have to go and consult and everything, wouldn't we?
We can, and we can note all that if you want us to.
Yeah.
It would be good just to put something in there to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, apart from that, I think you guys did a great job. So thanks.
Thank you.
Pauline, please.
Just wondering if you could expand on Crown appropriation. I don't quite understand what that means in an example. That's in the first slide, I think, in the revenue.
In slide number 1.
It was in that picture, that flow chart for the funding.
Yeah. So I'll give you a couple of examples of Crown appropriations that the previous government. So the NZ Up funding, the infrastructure funding, that was a Crown appropriation, as opposed to something that flows through the National Land Transport Fund. And often there's a different process. That might be a cabinet approved process rather than the NZTA.
That's great. Thank you. And just a bit of an oxymoron there, that statement, land use integration focus on unlocking access to greenfield land and compact urban form. Did we want to put in there what our preference is as Christchurch City?
I think there's yes, I think there's an opportunity to talk about the work that we've done, particularly through the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan, and thinking about our own growth and development and compact urban form, which is so yeah. Well, I think we'd look to contextualise Christchurch and some of the opportunities.
That's good, because I think this is another classic case of a one size fits all. And we need to have the opportunity to call out what our differences are. I don't want to get down into the weeds, but on the infringement fees, this is something that I've been on about for a long time, is the infringement of driving in a bus lane as opposed to parking in a bus lane. And I think the penalty for driving in it is higher than parking in it. And the impact of parking in it is worse than driving in it.
Yes.
So whether we want to call that out.
Yes, we do. We've talked about it as staff.
And we do about being able to recover the actual costs of some of the towage in particular. Because at the moment we can't recover the costs of the towage.
Right.
But yes, the fines for driving in a bus lane are over twice what they are for parking, but the impact is much higher.
And higher fare box recovery.
See it.
I absolutely oppose that. So if they can find a way through their increased revenue streams to actually, that is not going to help us to really get our public transport patronised or our emissions down or anything like that. So I'd be quite strong on that one. And also I'd like some strong comments about the reduction of funding and walking and cycling and safety. And also, I think you pointed out we want a fair and more equitable deal for Christchurch. We are now the second biggest city in New Zealand, and we're facing a lot of growth. And it's about getting ahead of the curve, really, and preparing for our transport so we don't face that congestion and having to put congestion charges and tolls in and stuff like that. So I think we need to be strong on pointing that out.
Yes, one of the things we have on, particularly in cycling and walking, one of the things we are pointing out is that shift of the maintenance and renewals into the cycling and walking category. So our footpath renewals will go into that, and everyone else's in the country will go into that work category now instead of just improvements.
Okay. Thanks.
Jake, please.
Thank you. Sorry, I've got a bit of a cough. Do you have a view in terms of the balance of the submission? I guess I'm concerned that at the moment it sort of seems like we've identified 6 things we like and 6 things we don't, but the things that we don't like, in my view, are quite consequential, whereas the 6 things we do like are relatively minor in nature. And I worry that we're heading towards a very, a very split kind of submission. Do you have a view on?
I think I'm interested in your thoughts as well, Annette. Look, I think my personal view with a submission is, if there are things in there that you support, it's good to call those out. But I guess we're looking for a steer from elected members in terms of the strength with which you want to.
I guess that's my steer, is it's looking very bland, and I think we should absolutely call out where we are supportive.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't want to spend half the submission on the 6 things that are relatively minor when there's drastic cuts to public transport and walking and cycling infrastructure.
Tyrone, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I absolutely support the comments about Christchurch and the South Island being overlooked. That's not a problem just of this government, but of successive governments in New Zealand, I think. We need to be really, really strong in our language. That's multiple government ministries, not just transport.
That's a good point.
And hey, look, let's toll State Highway 75. That sounds great. Just a broader comment is I don't think that so we've got a port, and it's in a geographically very difficult location, and it's constrained in the way that it can transport freight out of it and through the city to somewhere where it can be distributed properly. And I just don't think that we're really thinking enough about that. Like, there's only so many heavy laden trucks that we can send through what is essentially a bottleneck, and we can keep widening Brougham Street until it's 22 lanes, but it's going to be we're never going to really resolve that because the bottlenecks don't really exist. I mean, the bottleneck is the big massive mountain in between the port and the city. So I'm not quite sure what the solution is there, but I'd like to see us advocate more strongly about how we can move freight more efficiently from the port through to places where it can be distributed, whether that's through rail or whatever. Yeah. But it's something that I think that we should, as a city, because it's vital to our city's health in general, be willing to specifically advocate for. And again, it's like North Island thinking to South Island problems. It doesn't really help us. So about something that we should really focus on.
Yeah. So through the chair, just to note that we are going to talk to the port company as well. We're in the process of actioning that to have a talk to them. The rail network funding, just for your information, does now come under the National Land Transport Fund, and there is a point, we have noted a point around improving that the importance of getting freight onto rail where we can in appropriate ways. So that's a real linkage with the port. So we are trying to link up with the port and make sure we've got their views as well.
Yanni, please.
Thanks. Just some higher level kind of questions. One is, are we asking that we don't need to go to the competitive tender for roading projects? Like at the moment, can we do that? Like, because obviously, like we're bringing stuff back in-house for parks and it's probably going to be hugely beneficial. And if we wanted to bring roading back in-house, is that something that we can seek?
That's at an operational level that that's not something that's covered under the policy statement, and our requirement for the appropriate use of public funds is managed by the Office of the Auditor General, not by the Ministry of Transport.
But
so
my understanding
this is a policy document on how we have to focus on spending our money, not how we spend it, not the process that we go through to spend it.
But if it's costing a lot more because we're having to go to, the open market rather than being able to do things. I'm just mindful of the number of the projects that we've had to put on hold or change contracts to.
So through the chair, this is not at that level, this is not a topic for this GPS.
Okay.
And it's not something that we will be feeding back on.
Right.
It is something that we would have to go through in our procurement strategy.
Because I see like one of the key points is focus on value for money, exploration of a broader set of transport funding and financing tools. So
yeah, that is about how you finance the transport projects through taxes and the road user charges, the excise system, and how we achieve value for money by applying the right solution to a problem.
Just another question I had, I'm just trying to understand like what's happened with all the light rail, mass rapid transit, all the planning that's been going on for like almost a decade now. Have we got any progress on that, or are we just back to square one?
The work is progressing, but I think part of the strategy, of us saying we'd like to see it named as a project in the GPS to sort of lift it up as a priority. It'll still need to keep, go through NZTA board processes, et cetera, to get the next stage of business case funding, et cetera.
Right.
So in a nutshell, Councillor, it's not undone. It's still there.
Yeah.
We would like it recognised at a national level through the policy documentation is what we're suggesting we could request.
So the 100 million that was given to us wasn't actually, but have we got that? Or
what 100 million was that?
I thought the government had a policy of 100 million. Or what did we get? 93 million for?
No, it was 78 and it never existed, and we didn't get it.
You're right.
Yeah.
Never existed.
Sounded good.
So, okay. And then the other thing that I know ECAN's passed a resolution to look at bringing the bus services back in-house as well. So are we working with them on that around the public transport proposal?
Again, that's at an operational level and not part of this policy conversation today. I'd have to come back on
kind
that.
of farebox recovery?
No, farebox recovery is a different system.
Okay, right.
Okay, and just the final. I'm sorry, just the road renewals. Does this change mean that we'll get more roads renewed?
It indicates that the logistics of how it's set up may not mean that, because how the money is set up in the working categories, in the work categories for NZTA, and the rules around how we can apply for that may not. What we haven't got is the full picture yet.
Okay.
So there's more money ostensibly through this process. Can you go back to your money slide?
Yes.
Show me the money.
Which money? That money?
One. That's the one.
Yeah.
Show me the money. So that shows an increased investment, but there's also a lot of increased expensive state highway projects in that investment. Even the local road maintenance has a lot of big projects in the North Island that are required to come. So it doesn't necessarily mean we will get more done or more subsidy.
Okay, just like to move along.
Just the feedback in terms of that is that I do think we have a special case in Christchurch, given the patch repairs that were done post-earthquake. We do have a number of roads and renewals that are, we need to do. So in our submission, I think we do need to think about the context of Christchurch when we're asking for sort of a bit of a more increased focus on here, and particularly around the earthquake damage that we still, need to fix.
Thank you.
Through the chair, we'll figure out how to phrase it. Yep.
Thank you. Aaron, please. Your next, Tyler.
So got a couple of points. Most of it does look really good. The only one is we go to the last page on our talking points. The one that concerns me there is, where's the bit about Pages Road? Oh, yeah. So it's the third bullet, after lack of representation in Canterbury and region.
Yep.
So I think the Pages Road Bridge should be separate, so it stands out more rather than mixed in with PT and MRT. It has to be separate because there's lives lost if it doesn't go ahead and there's a big earthquake. It's quite different to still having to walk or bike to work, not catching the train.
Sure.
Okay.
There's considerable difference there. So if that could be just drawn out. And then one around reducing the impact around work zones, fully support that. And the pilot vehicle for a road sweeper still makes no sense, given if you run into a road sweeper, you will come out second best. And then, but the other one is, and when you drive in the States, when you go through a work zone, the signs are up that says fines double when it's an active work zone. So if there's workers there and you breach the 30K, you do anything that's illegal driving that gets you a fine, the fine doubles. And I think we should look at that in New Zealand. And because when you see that sign, you really check your speed because your fine's going to be double. And I think it's a really good one to encourage good behaviour.
So the government has indicated that they want to look at the enforcement and the ticket amounts and enforcement amounts. So that's something for us to add to that.
Yeah, in the work zone.
Yeah, and work zones in particular. I think that's an idea we have to
No, that's right.
Good one to highlight.
Good idea.
And then finally on the tolls, I do disagree a little with Sam on that one. That I look at the southern motorway or the northern motorway that potentially they could be tolled. But as long as the funding was to go into improvements on that, so it's locked too, because it's pre-investing, it's taking money for the next one rather than having to come up with all the money, then do the next one. It's like a pre-investment. So yeah. Hewitt Breen's Gardeners, they're already told with time and life threat.
Okay, Tyler, please.
Kia ora. I just have a couple of questions. I'm a bit contrasting to Yanni in regards to local roads versus national roads of significance. I'm in support of the elements that you are supporting, but I would like some clarification on the issues and requests raised. The first one is about the MRT, and actually, the first one is about the Canterbury package, essentially. Are you looking to prioritise each one or tell the government which ones you would prefer to have prioritised, or will we just be thrown into a package as such?
At the moment, the Canterbury package only includes two projects that are not ours. Horsell Road State Highway, so the one in Brougham Street, the ones that are funded out of the previous NZ Up programme of work. What we were looking to say is at a regional level, from a Canterbury perspective, these two projects, being PT Futures / MRT, sort of as a package, and Pages Road Bridge are we believe of regional significance, that they should be put within that package and financed within that package.
Great.
Which lifts them up.
And are you recommending a timestamp on this in terms of like, say for example, we'd love to have Pages Road Bridge on at 2027 onwards?
They would all still need to be programmed within the LTP in an appropriate way.
Okay.
For delivery.
That's you pretty much answered all my questions. I'm genuinely in support of this. I'm a bit pessimistic, but I do want to just sort of reiterate that it's good, probably better to hone in and show something measurable, specific and smart to this government to get them something to understand instead of broadening it, if that's okay.
Yep.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Melanie.
I've got a few things. With the local road improvements, I was going to ask Yanni's question. Are we able to say that we would like a focus on renewals of local roads if possible? Can we add that in? Like it talked about money for local road improvements. Can we ask for it to be on what we want it to be as part of our submission?
I wouldn't go to that level, no.
Why not?
Well, you can. It's getting down to the issue is around the rules of how it's applied, because oh, wrong way.
Hang on, go this
Go
way.
back to your money. Show me the money.
Money. Here we go.
So that is a national. That is a national area. So that amount of money is spread across everyone across the country. So at the moment, we don't have the rules of how it's going to be applied from NZTA within a work category. They've just said what it needs to focus on. And so the local road maintenance is about resurfacing, rehabilitation, and that's pretty much, and drainage. And that's pretty much it. That's all you can claim. Whereas in the past, and they've got maintenance and renewals in that, which is not a street renewal. A street renewal is an improvement. Yeah. So it comes under local road improvements. If we go and do resurfacing, so our resurfacing program would come under that. The rehabs that we do, which are, big area wides or pitch fixes. But we would need every year to our program would be set every year based on the rules around. That's where the road efficiency group comes in, so that we start getting consistency across the country of everybody making similar types of decisions based on condition, age, all the rest of it. Yeah. I just don't know that we'd get any benefit from going down to that level. Sorry, that's probably where in the submission.
Okay.
Of naming the roads that we want to be done.
No, not naming the roads, but to ask for potential for full street renewals, which is an improvement, but it's something that is needed.
Yeah.
It is a nice to have in some respects, but it's something that people want to see.
We certainly are looking to highlight the restrictiveness that ring fencing, that funding does, and the impact that has on the community. I think that's probably what we could, how we could phrase it.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yep.
Let's see how it comes through, and we can tweak it.
I don't think there'd be any councillor against road renewals in this room.
Yeah.
Next one's about that rail network funding. So that's reducing hugely. I was wondering what if
it's up.
The 20.
It's up on average.
No,
but the story of potential
20.
drop off.
Oh yeah.
So I was wondering what effect that would have on projects going across railway lines, or either with their funding, obviously would have huge, but if we were funding it, would that cause even greater delays with us like working with them, or would it make it easier because we've got no money to spend, so we've got nothing to do, and we can get on with them quicker? Like, what do you think that effect would be? And can we comment on that somehow?
Yeah, we have looked to comment on, because there is a point in the GPS noting level crossings and looking to improve safety at level crossings, and noting that it will be the Rail Network NZTA and the local councils that will be funding it. Given the squeeze on their funding, or particularly on the lower limits for their funding, and the potential for decrease in funding, my take would be would make it harder to get things done and safety improvements made and changes made to their network.
Well, can we make comments in that vein? Because that's something that's very important. With this NZ Up and the Brom Street project, is the indications that will continue as it's been planned today, including the bridge?
The bridge has always been on the plan. It's the extra lanes that they're still not sure of. I'm not sure what the package includes, but
I was wondering if we could phrase something in there about supporting that to go ahead and focusing on how make improvements to the freight network, and we support that.
And the safety of crossing it, the north-south.
Yeah, but I would like us to focus on the way that the government will be viewing this. it talks about local roads and supporting urban growth. I wondered, because it was one of the points we wanted to, I can't remember the phrase, points for discussion.
Oh gosh, what about
I wondered if we could, when we talk about that, we could talk about how local roads and urban growth obviously leads to increased economic growth and productivity. And if we phrase it in that vein, that might help.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes, we will be doing that.
With the tolling, I agree kind of with Aaron. Like, I think being able to toll more roads is good. Congestion charging, I'm happy with that as well. And I agree about the RUCs being proportionate to the size and distance of a vehicle. Having a small vehicle myself, kind of be good. But also, could we ask if we, it's also fair, but can we ask if we could fast track those changes? Because I've had people talk about having hybrids that are, you know, their hybrid gives them like 6 or 7 Ks or something crazy, and they're going to be charged twice. And they're not happy about that. So fast tracking that would be fair.
Andre, please.
Thank you. Is there any reason we couldn't or shouldn't make mention of the Cook Strait Ferry in our submission?
Given it's the connection to the South Island.
I don't know if it's in here anywhere.
Just a thought anyway.
Just raising it, or even the alternate port down by Blenheim. Whether if the government's ever going to do it, carves an hour off the ferry and an hour off the road. It's a considerable saving. Is that?
So I don't know.
We're not. I have read this several times, and I don't recall the reference to the ferry in it. But we can have a look. We can have a look. Yeah.
Well, on Andrew's point, can it not just be we note that the connection between the North and South Island is imperative to the New Zealand's second largest city?
It is called a land transport plan. So you'd have to talk about connecting the two pieces of land.
Well, yeah, we've got transport going over land to
There was. I'll just.
It'll be good to raise it.
Well.
Yeah, just thought it'd be good to raise if we can.
Okay. Good question.
And just the other point, the focus on unlocking access to greenfield land. I mean, the issue we've got at the moment is that we are unlocking greenfield land and developing on it, but there is no funding for public transport to these new greenfield areas. And if the government is going to make councils unlock access to greenfield land, there is a need to also provide funding for public transport. Otherwise, it creates congestion, more congestion than it needs to. I do feel like this is something we should raise in our submission, because that's what's happening now. It's adding to congestion, and it's becoming a real issue, actually, in greenfield areas with no public transport anywhere nearby.
Yep.
That's it for me. Thank you.
All right. Tyrone, you had another question?
I did, thank you, Phil. I was thinking about it, like, what are the implications here for rural roads? Particularly those that aren't sealed.
Rural roads. They are called out specifically unsealed roads.
Right.
And in the local road.
Rightio. I mean,
maintenance. What was it called? That work category that we were talking about just before.
So just in the and forgive that I haven't completely got my head around it, but like, what are is there anything in particular that we need to be mindful of to support our communities in this city that are serviced by those, by vulnerable rural roads or even unsealed roads? So
I do think there is a better focus on that in this. The counter of what I said to Councillor Coker just before is that there is a stronger focus on local road maintenance, unsealed road maintenance, and drainage, and they are all in the same work category. So the bulk of the issues that we have, particularly on the peninsula and the unsealed roads, are drainage issues, and that is included in the same work category. So there is a positive in that.
Well, that's
sense.
good. That's encouraging. Thank you.
Thank you. And Aaron, and then Sam lastly.
Yeah, so just going back to the ferry one, and this could be an angle for putting it in, is that it has been brought to my attention that it does stack up more economically to reboot Littleton to Wellington ferries. So maybe that's because that also takes the costs off the road and the road maintenance between the two, that the government should seriously look at that as one of its options going forward. So just that we're just raising the flag saying, hey, look, this is an option.
I think we
please
tie that with that freight conversation around in and out of Littleton and all the rest of it.
Just
Thank you. Celeste, please.
Thank you. I think a lot of the points have been covered. I agree with Andre's point around the kind of urban sprawl without any investment in public transport. I think as well, walking and cycling in terms of like having to demonstrate a clear economic benefit. I'm quite concerned about that because we're all aware that if you don't have infrastructure in place, then people are less likely to use different modes of transport. If you don't have roads, you can't drive. You don't have a place to bike, you're less likely to do it. So I'd just like to kind of maybe emphasize the point that we need to kind of continue investing in those aspects. Just have a question around local road improvements and supporting the inclusion of end-of-life bridges and structures. What does that mean?
So historically, end-of-life bridges and structures renewals, we're under a renewals category in the sort of in the local road maintenance work category, and they've been pulled out and into the local road improvements category, which means that end-of-life bridges, such as the ones that are being done in Fendleton at the moment, will no longer attract funding from the maintenance part of and renewals part of the work category. Though you can only get work for you can only get funding for the road and the road surface. You can't get it for the structure. It will come out of a local road improvement, which means all of the other projects that are in local road improvements that we have, which at the moment would also include your street renewals, are all fighting for the same pot of money, which is pretty static. There's a minor increase there. That's pretty static. Yeah. And no Pages Road Bridge would be in that boat.
Yes, so I did wonder if that would have a flow-on effect there. The other one is around the focus on renewal and resurfacing of roadway only. What is the flow-on effect for that? Say, if you're looking for value for money by resurfacing the shoulder of a road so people can travel safely off the road. Is there a flow-on effect there, or is it just?
I think that's the clarification that we're looking for in terms of the flexibility across some of the activity classes and the needing to tease out maybe some unintended consequences.
Yeah. So typically in the past, would it include, if it's specifying that, would have included footpaths before?
Yes, sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, there was a footpath category in road maintenance, but if you look at this, so this is the key run around your activity class descriptions. And it says, I have to look on mine because things in the way. Sorry. Got it. Is, what did I say? So for example, safety, there's very clear messages around what is not to be funded. And local road improvements will be, local road improvements are the same. There's some more messages around what's not included or not to be funded. The pothole prevention is that maintenance space, and then walking and cycling now includes your maintenance for footpaths, any shared paths, and any activities funded must undergo consultation. So that has an implication for us if we're doing maintenance work.
And then one more point of clarification, what's safe system infrastructure? Is that?
Speed bumps.
Oh, okay.
Stuff like that.
So no investment whatsoever available for any sort of
limited
calming.
Reduced.
Yeah. Quite significant in areas that haven't had any of that work done yet. So I'd like that to be emphasised as something that I think we should be prioritising.
Sorry, Celeste, forgot, what were you prioritising?
Oh, it just says there's no investment whatsoever to be made into safe system infrastructure. It's a very blanket statement. So that would be quite a lot of forms of traffic calming that I think would be really useful. And then I guess the final thing would be around climate change, which is a previous strategic priority. This is no mention of how this will fit with emissions reduction. I just don't see how this will deliver on that.
So they have indicated in the GPS that they're looking to update.
Right, and
So, yeah, I have some questions.
thank you. So lastly, Sam, and it's been good discussion by everyone. Thank you very much.
It's probably more the process for F&P next week. So I'm just thinking it's really good that everyone's had the chance to talk through their issues and things like that. I guess what I'm asking is, in the submission, can you go away and categorize things in a way in which where you get the general feel there's consensus, and then the stuff where there may be a differing point of view, so that if there were people putting amendments up, they can deal with them like that. So we're not wordsmithing the whole thing.
Yes.
We've kind of got 2 or 3 things at the end that when Melanie's chairing it, she has to do.
Yeah,
is that okay?
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah.
We'll
Okay.
look to do
And Victoria, just one quick.
Yeah, nice, be quick one. It's more for the next stage, really. I'm keen to understand how this impacts our resourcing and our budgets going forward. And it's really a quick question now to staff as to what's the next step in that process in terms of actually what all this means for us, how it impacts us.
We'll need another session.
It's going to be a lot of work for you, one way or another. Okay.
Maybe.
All right. Thank you very much for everyone's input, and thank you for the presentation. Very good. Thank you. Okey-doke.
Thank you very much.
So I'd like to welcome Alan and Shana from the policy team, who are here to talk about the upcoming review of the council's gambling and TAB venues policy.
Hello. So we've been asked to provide councillors with some information of the upcoming review of the gambling and TAB venue policy. The council has had this policy in place since 2004, and we are required under legislation to have it and to review it every 3 years. And because our policy was last reviewed in 2021, we need to review it again this year. So the role of councils with respect to gambling is quite limited. DIA is the primary regulator of gambling licensing and compliance, but an applicant for a new venue must first get council consent, which is considered using this policy. Under the Gambling Act, we are required to have a policy on Class 4 gambling, which is also known as pokies outside of a casino. The policy must specify whether Class 4 venues can be established in the district, and if so, where they can be established. The legislation enables councils to limit the number of venues in the district and also limit the number of machines. We also can have a relocation policy, which would allow venues to move anywhere in the district and take their machines with them. While the policy is limited in scope, it does provide the first hurdle for new Class 4 venues or machines in the district. And so it can be a complex review, and it can attract significant interest from the community. And then with respect to TAB, we're required to have a policy on TAB venues. This is even more limited in scope than with pokies. It only applies to TAB stores or standalone TAB, which is a premises that is owned or leased by the TAB, where the primary business being carried out on site is sport or race betting. It doesn't apply to pub TABs or kiosk TABs. There are only 3 TAB stores in Christchurch, so this is not a preferred retail outlet for TAB New Zealand. And again, a policy must specify whether and where TAB venues can be established in the district. So we have a combined Class 4 and TAB gambling policy, which is quite common among councils across New Zealand. Our policy on pokies is a sinking lid, which means the council will not grant consent for new venues or allow existing venues to increase the number of machines. The primary intent of the policy is to minimise harm through reducing gambling accessibility by reducing the number of venues over time. The policy with respect to TAB venues is relatively permissive, But the reality is these types of venues are rare and have been reducing over time anyway. We will undertake a full review of the literature and gambling data as part of the project, but the DAA does provide a dashboard and we can pull some information from this pretty quickly. So just as an indicator as to where things are at in Christchurch, the figure on the left of the screen shows Class 4 gaming venue and machine numbers between 2004 and 2023. As at September 2023, we have 1,258 machines in the district, which is a decrease of 900 machines since the policy was first adopted, and the number of venues has halved since 2004. But in recent years, there has been some slight fluctuations with the machine numbers, which is not a result of the policy. So this is because there are two reasons for this. The first is that some venues are not always operating the maximum number of machines. And also some venues will put their licenses on hold while they are having refurbishments or earthquake rebuilds and stuff like that. But that is the jurisdiction of the DAA and not of the council. And then the figure on your right is Class 4 gambling expenditure from 2015 to 2023. So expenditure or gambling profits or GMP is money put into the machines, less prizes paid out. So money lost by gamblers. And it has been relatively steady in the past with some seasonal fluctuations, but we have noticed greater fluctuations in the quarters post the initial COVID lockdown. The expenditure from September 2022 to September 2023 is just under $94 million for the district. There has been a recent change to case law which council may wish to consider as part of this review process. So the Gambling Act was amended in 2013, and since then councils have been able to include a relocation provision in its policies. The current policy is silent on relocations, and the effect of this is that council will not grant consent for for machine or venue relocations. While the council's policy does not allow them, there had been limited scope for venues to relocate under what was known as the Waikiwi precedent, which was a High Court decision in 2013. The criteria for this had four elements. The venue had to be moving close by, it had to have the same name, the same owners, and for all intents and purposes would be considered the same venue by the public. And if a proposed shift met those criteria, it was DAA simply updated the license, and it wasn't a relocation wasn't considered using our policy. But this also meant that councils could not prevent these shifts, even if we had a relocation policy that expressly prohibited relocations in the district. But in February of this year, a new High Court decision has come down that confirmed that Waikiwi relocation applications are not available under the Gambling Act, as the 2013 amendment gave councils the powers to consider relocations and to have a relocation policy. So should council wish to allow relocations in the future, you would need to include a provision in your policy going forward. We do have a couple of requirements when we review this policy. We have to review it every 3 years. The policy can only be amended or replaced in accordance with the special consultative procedure as outlined in the Local Government Act. And feedback we've had in the past is that we cannot make any amendments to the policy, even drafting changes, without an SCP. That means that we actually haven't undertaken an SCP on this policy since 2006. And previous reviews since then have just been we've consulted stakeholders, so the corporate societies that own the pokie machines, TAB New Zealand, and the problem gambling service providers. When we review the policy, we have to have regard for social impact of gambling within the district. And if we consider a relocation provision, we have to consider the social impact of gambling in high deprivation communities. And a policy does not cease to have effect because it's under review or it is due for review. So preliminary information gathering has begun with desktop research as part of the social impact report. Key stakeholders will soon be sent a questionnaire seeking their views on the current policy settings and asking for any feedback they would like us to consider as part of the review. This information will be used to develop an issues and options paper to narrow down possible policy directions. If council wishes, we can hold a workshop to discuss policy options for this review. We'll then bring a report to council in September of this year. At this point, council can either decide to retain the policy without amendment, or it could choose to consult on proposed changes. And those proposed changes could just be drafting updates, and then that could be an opportunity to consult the community on the current policy settings and to reconfirm community mandate. If council does decide to consult on proposed changes, there will be a consultative procedure that runs from mid-September to mid-October. There'll be a hearings panel likely November, December, and then the hearings panel will likely report back to council early next year. We'll take any questions at this stage.
Righty-yo. I've got Tyler first, please.
Kia ora. I've got a couple of questions. The first one is asking in general, what kind of restrictions or provisions can we apply on those areas of high deprivation?
So we can't close venues. The policy only applies to new venue consents. But with respect to a relocation provision, there's a lot of things you could do. You could specify where venues can relocate to. So you could have specific parts of the city that have lower levels of deprivation, for example, and allow venues to relocate there. But it's a carrot, not a stick. You can't force venues to close and to move.
Oh, of course. It was more around the relocation part.
Yeah.
I'm trying to hone this question in so it's understandable. The real question I've got is there a measurable, is there a scope in which we can apply those provisions to be able to put that against it? For example, if there's no evidence that supports what we're asking to restrict on and around high deprivation areas, then we might not be able to apply it without it being pushed back. So are there measures or targets?
So we do have mesh block, deprivation mesh block scoring across the city that we could use to find pockets where council may find it preferable to allow venues to relocate.
Okay. And those already established venues will obviously be unaffected by the changes in the policy that it stands. Mm-hmm. Is that correct?
The recent high
the one that it stands right now. So for example, we say yes to this policy, we add those extra provisions around, but potentially add extra provisions around restricting relocation. But those ones that are already established there, they cannot get more pokies in their bars, or they can't relocate
the
without
existing venues.
Yeah.
So the limits on the existing venue licenses are set by the DIA. So venues that established before October 2001 can have 18 machines, and venues established after October 2001 can have 9 machines. A relocation provision would allow them to take all of their machines into a new district and into a new part of town.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much.
Aaron, please.
2 points. One, both a little bit radical or quite. First one is the current model is you are renting a site and the machines pay a site rental, so on and so forth. So that's good for the business. They can run their business based on the pokies are paying for the entire site to run your thing. Then the money's distributed by various trusts. Do we have the power in any way, shape or form to take over the distribution of that money, that at a point in future, it becomes a council committee or the Mayor's Welfare Fund or whichever, or our arts fund, that then we do the distribution of the funds? I believe Invercargill might have something like that. It's under licensing trust, but that's alcohol. But
my understanding, we have legal here who might know more. My understanding is the corporate societies dictate how funds are distributed.
Yeah, and that can be questionable at times. There's a lot of rugby teams with the 8th scrum machine.
Well, it comes down to the fact that those trusts actually run the machines. They normally put them in the actual outlets, right. So they control the distribution of the funds. Well, from my understanding, I can't confirm what the situation is with Invercargill because right. It's a different beast.
So is that something we can look into, or there's just no chance at all?
I don't think it's allowed for in the actual Gambling Act, but it's something we could look at, but I suspect it's not.
It'd be nice. I don't know, and there might not be an appetite at the table to look into it and us distribute the funds as we see fit. But we have a lot of staff that already distribute funds, so
yeah, if we control, it depends on if we control the machines and distribute the funds, there could well be a conflict situation going forward in terms of, we're distributing our funds, and this is gambling funds. So I have to look at it more clearly, but I think there could be problems.
Right. Okay. Well, it'll be nice to know. And then the other one is, does this affect in any way, shape, or form the establishment of any more casinos in town? Or this is
that's a matter for DIA.
So that all sits with them.
Yes.
Yeah, because that could be. I mean, we could
our planning
invite 4 licenses to the city as long as you attach a 300 room plus hotel. Would change the inner city quite considerably very quickly. Especially when we need hotel rooms coming up. But we could, I'd be keen for us to ask DIA to write and actually seriously ask that within a particular zone in town, we can have the establishment of up to 4 new casinos with big hotels attached. The economic stimulation would be great. Strict rules that, on who goes in and out, but a great way to activate all the hotels we need to support the new stadium. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Viva Las Christchurch, Viva Las Jobs, not lost jobs.
Okay, Samuel.
Sorry, mine's probably a really basic one. Do we need to do this? It seems like a lot of work for something that sort of isn't broken. But we sort of saying there's going to be a staff report and all that kind of stuff. It hasn't been done for 18 years in terms of it hasn't been fully reviewed, has it?
No, we review it in full each time. We just undertake targeted consultation because the Act only requires an SCP if we're proposing changes to the policy.
Right.
We haven't proposed changes since 2006. And when we consulted in 2006, the overwhelming feedback from the public was that they supported the existing policy provisions. And so we haven't
So
drafted
basically,
any
if
changes
we do a
since
bit of pre-engagement or however we're going to do it, and they come back and say, yeah, we don't think we should change, then we're quite happy just to rubber stamp it. We don't have to. I just don't want to create a heap of work over something that could be quite controversial.
If I can just, there is one existing issue, and that is the fact that we don't have a relocation policy within our existing policy.
Right.
And because of the repeal, the change in the decision, the new High Court decision, which has effectively changed the ballpark in terms of the Waikiwi decision, we have a problem now where we have venues that are, because of their lease, are looking to move down the road. And as it stands, because we don't have a relocation policy, we can't allow those pokies to be relocated 100 metres down the road.
Right.
Which under the Waikiwi decision would have been allowed by DIA.
So we will have to do an SCP then?
Yes, potentially, yes.
We will, won't we? If it's not in the policy, and
it will. Yes.
Yeah, that's why I was sort of unclear on, because it's sort of there's a couple of stages that indicate it could be rubber stamp, but then
it's just had a commercial impact on certain businesses.
Yeah.
Okay. It may well be the public say no, and that's just their hard luck.
Okay. All right.
Okay, Kelly.
I would really like to have a workshop and to better understand what our responsibility, what our role is here. I'm really curious about the scrutiny that's put on the distribution of the funds, and would like to know more about that. And maybe that's not a question you need to answer right now. And I'm really keen to know how we can reduce the impact, the number of these facilities. This is probably a wider discussion that we would have, but I don't think anything good happens in these places. In fact, I think they're a blight on our society, particularly in the in the suburban localities, from what I see. So yeah, I'd be really interested to know how we could reduce the number and definitely stop relocation occurring. that's just my personal view, but yeah.
The issue that we do have is that our policy only applies to venues that are wanting to establish. We can't do anything to close existing venues, and a lot of that responsibility sits with the DIA. So yeah, our sinking lid is considered kind of the gold standard of Class 4 gambling policy that is intended to reduce accessibility, but it's a slow process to reduce it, to get venues out of the community.
Yeah, it's a shame. It's actually hard work, because these places can literally destroy lives. But anyway, needs to be better regulated. Thank you.
Yanni, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the initial work you've done on this. One of the concerns I've got is around online gambling now and the impact that that's having. So I appreciate that this is only for the venues, right? So we can't look at anything external like online.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just trying to, as in the area that I represent, where I'm familiar with one of the Waikiwi decisions, which seemed to, I guess, depending on your view, but seemed quite surprising to me that that was enabled. Can you just help me understand what that court case kind of said? I still don't quite understand the ramifications of that decision, because it looked to me when DAA made the approval in Woolston, it looked pretty hollow in terms of the assessment done around the impact and harm. So I guess I was just kind of trying to understand if there was anything in that court case that referenced the fundamental question, which is, what does this do for the harm to the community?
Are you talking about the Waikiwi decision or the recent High Court decision?
The recent, I'm interested in understanding what the recent High Court decision does in terms of getting better assessment of the impact of a proposal to relocate. So like when I looked at the previous decision in Woolston, it seemed really odd to me that there was no sort of assessment around harm minimisation as part of it. It just seemed to be just tick, go ahead, do it. And there was very little evidence or information that was attached to the approval process.
I don't think the court dealt with the approval process. What they were looking at was the changes to the Act in 2013 and how they impacted on the ability to relocate premises, and how the Waikiwi decision had been imposed or utilised. If the actual parties bringing the action were Families for Food, and also the DIA was in support, they'd actually they'd been enforcing the Waikiwi decision and realised lately, I think it was about 2021, that they'd incorrectly been utilising that decision post the 2013 changes to the legislation, which clearly states that you have to have a relocation policy before you can agree to a relocation of a premises.
Right.
So that's quite clear now.
Okay. So if we don't have a relocation policy, effectively that stops the ability to relocate.
Yes.
That effectively, it's just further sinking lid on top of what we've got now.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be.
Yeah. And just interested if we've had any assessment of, like, you've given us some high level statistics, but any understanding of the impact in terms of the lowest socioeconomic areas of the city and where the revenue or the money is being generated from versus where the distribution is going?
So that is feedback that we've received from problem gambling service providers in the past, that a lot of the funds lost by gamblers are from venues that are in high deprivation communities, and that a lot of the recipients of Class 4 gambling funds are not from those parts of the city. But where the gambling funds are distributed is not the jurisdiction of the council. But we are aware that there are a lot of venues in high deprivation communities at the moment.
Okay, I guess I was just interested if personally, I wouldn't favour having a relocation policy, but I appreciate we need to get the report, come to us and set out all the different arguments and options. But I guess I'm interested in what the impact of having that discussion would be in terms of lower socioeconomic areas getting an increased number of
So you could have a relocation policy because we are required to consider the impact of gambling in high deprivation communities. You could have a relocation policy that is deprivation focused with the intention to get pokies out of high deprivation communities and move them to other parts of the city,
Right.
which is something council could consider if that was of interest.
Yeah. Personally, I think just from memory, I think last time, I think when we got some statistics, there was actually quite a range of pokey venues, and actually it was quite consistent across the venues in terms of the activity. But yeah, I'd welcome any information around.
We will provide further information closer to time once we're done the review, including some mapping of where the Bahoki venues are in Christchurch currently across the deprivation.
And just one question, sorry, just to check on the TAB. So a lot of places seem to just be going to a TAB kiosk rather than having a TAB service.
Yeah.
Is there any, I mean, obviously that produces greater risk around harm minimization, not having people there, not having any sort of, I guess, personal interaction with people that are gaming or gambling. So like, is there anything that we can do around that space, around minimum requirements, or are we just not allowed to have anything to do with the TAB other than official?
Yeah, the only thing we can do with TAB is provide consent for new TAB stores. So the standalone TABs to establish. Everything else is the jurisdiction of the DIA. Right. We can advocate to Ministry of Health around harm prevention tools and host responsibility requirements, but that's kind of the extent of our role in this space.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Yanni. Tyrone, please.
Thank you. Can we just quickly look at slide 5, if possible? So just a couple of questions on that. So over since 2004, so there's obviously been a huge reduction, and then it's kind of like the number of machines is leveled out and it hasn't really changed since the earthquake, although the number of venues is reducing. So I'm taking from that fewer venues, more machines, so it's consolidating into certain venues. And then you look at the other chart.
No, it's sort of half the venues, half the machines, roughly, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, but since 2013, the number of machines hasn't changed, but the number of venues has reduced quite markedly. Therefore, it's safe to conclude that there are more machines and fewer venues, right? That's probably a fair.
Yeah, I wouldn't
fair
say
analysis of that.
I wouldn't say the venues have dropped that much, but yeah, okay.
That's likely to be the
well, they've dropped by 20% in 10 years
that are closing. So potentially venues that have only 9 machines are the ones that are maybe closing or have their licenses on hold or something like that. And that's why we're seeing the ratio of machines to venues changing a little bit over those time. But we will look into this further as we conduct the review. This is just pulling the initial data from the DAA dashboard to provide an overview of what the current situation is in Christchurch.
Oh, yep. Sorry. Yep. No, that's cool. Thank you. But just on the other chart, so it looks to me like revenue was pretty static for 5 years up until 2020, but it's been increasing for whatever reason over the last few years. And so I'm taking from those two charts that same number of machines over the last 10 years and fewer venues making more money. So my question is our policy having the desired impact? And if so, what, do we need to change or amend or just status quo or whatever? And the second part of that is, what's the research in terms of, because like online gambling is a thing, right? And just because the people are gambling less in pubs or whatever, not that they are by those charts, but let's just say they are, and we're reducing that, we're still just taking it out of venues and putting it in the home. And is that the kind of outcome that we want? And if not, what would we do about that?
So research with respect to accessibility has has shown that the closer someone is to a gambling location, the higher chance of them gambling at that site and experiencing harm from problem gambling. So the literature supports an accessibility theory of problem gambling. But yeah, you're right. The expenditure in the last 3 years has been quite has fluctuated much more wildly than we've seen in the past. And potentially problem gambling service providers have some insight into why that is. But we'll need to do some further research and again on new literature on online gambling and its impact on class 4 gambling.
Because it would be quite useful next to this to see the amount of money spent in online gambling and number of participants in Christchurch, because if those numbers are going through the roof, then we've markedly failed in what we're trying to achieve, right?
Yeah, we can provide some further information on the expenditure of online gambling in the last couple of years and sort of what's happening in that space. But our role isn't to reduce the harm from online gambling by making pokies more accessible or trying to shift people into different forms of gambling. It's just to minimize harm from class 4 gambling and TAB, standalone TAB gambling through this policy.
So we're comfortable as a council to, as long as it's not happening in the way that we want it to, and we're just pushing it into the homes, it's kind of not our problem. I mean, so like, and that's not for you to answer, right? That's a question for the group to just try and say, well, what's the steer we're trying to give? Because, you know, if it's to push it away from certain places, but you know, if we can't see the harm that's being done, like, what are we trying to do? I guess it's probably a broader kind of.
And can I ask a supplementary on that, Phil? Is it correct that the online gambling, no money comes back into the community, it goes offshore? Yes. Which actually, if you're correct.
So in a way, we want to make it easier for people to go to the TAB and gamble.
But there's also no controls.
I think that's a very good point that you're making, Tyrone, about are we pushing it into people's homes?
Hang on, right, we'll just get back to where we're supposed to be.
Yeah.
To me.
Yeah, thank you. Following on those lines, that's the concern. So, and it's really not for today because your information is really clear, and thank you. And it does seem on that slide that fewer machines, just more money going through them. So, you know, yeah. But I guess the big question for us, and it would be really good to get some information on, is, you know, the comments that I've heard people saying that we've experienced that RATA's narrowing of funding has forced more people to come to us for funding, and that's forcing, I guess, more people to gaming machine charities, which is not a negative or a positive, but it's just a fact. So if we are indeed narrowing and trying to reduce the number of gambling machines and places to gamble, then there is less likelihood that those home gamblers on online gambling are going to get help. So I guess what are we? I think we've got to revisit. The world's changed. Online gambling, it's billionaires all over the place. You know, the number of online gambling money makes pokie machines look like a joke now, I think. And I think that's what the information, and I think we need to understand that and revisit, with the world's changing onto online gambling, what we're trying to achieve. Because we've got organisations narrowing their funding, so it's forcing people to go to online gambling trusts, but at least the money's being spent back into the community. You can argue round and round about what's good and what's not. So I think we need to get some real information on where we're going to go as a council and what direction, what we want to achieve and what we want to send, because I think the world's changed and yeah, we're way behind. Thank you. This is really good. Thank you.
Kia ora. You did a really good job with the equity and inclusion policy and collating all of those other policies into one. I want to hone into this deprivation part here and ask you a question that might get you thinking, but I do recognise that this policy in itself is just one facet of what deprivation can actually entail. Now, if we're looking at it from another view, for example, access to short-term loans, the proximity of fast food joints, in highly deprived areas. And I'm honing on a Woolston and Linwood here, particularly seeing the TABs and the cash converters and all those other parts that actually add to deprivation within our communities. Would you consider looking at those other policies and putting your eyes over those to see if they align with your changes in this one here? It's a really big question. Sorry, guys. You can come back to me offline. I was just interested to see, because you're really good at looking at the other policies and collated those and went across those. So
we do have a review of the council's external policy register going on at the moment, so we can certainly give that consideration as we're looking across our scope of policies and report back.
Okay, no, that'd be great. Thanks so much for that. You're making really good change. Thanks for coming to me. Thanks.
Victoria, Vicky, or
Victoria. Thank you very much. I'm keen to get some clarity for all of us around what it is we can actually influence and control as a council and what we can't, because it occurs to me that a lot of the conversation and the questions today are actually the domain of DIA. So I think it would be helpful if we were to have a workshop or something later for councillors upskilling and knowledge, that we understand clearly where that boundary is, because it appears to me as if we're trying to boil the ocean and do a whole heap of things that actually isn't within our territory. So perhaps at a later date, some of that information would be helpful. I mean, I acknowledge the issues that are being raised, particularly in relation to that online gambling as well. It's actually beyond our control. Yes. So I think it would be helpful for there to be a very clear line about what we can and can't do within the realms of what you guys can deliver. Thanks.
So thank you very much. So are we aiming down the barrel of a workshop here where it says optional?
If you would like, we can host a workshop.
I think so.
Maybe